I'm good.
All right. Okay, so there's gonna be 5 different segments of like time periods. First question is, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted when I was, I joined the National Guard when I was 17 years old. I was in the Smithfield National Guard, and I joined in 1949. And in 1950, they activated the Smithfield Unit of National Guard. It was the 449th Field Observation Battalion. And we were activated on active duty. And the Korean War started, and that was why they pulled us up on active duty. So I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia, when I went to Fort Rooker, Alabama to start with. And we stayed down there a short while, and then we come back to Fort Bragg. And I went from National Guard to regular Army. I joined the regular Army. And the sad thing about it, or the good thing about it, I reckon it's sad, I think. But I got married on June of the 9th, 1951. And in August of 1951, I got orders to go to Korea. Been married less than 90 days. And I went to Korea. I was in the Korean War. I was in the 2nd Infantry Division, 37th Artillery, Field Artillery. And I was a communication chief. I was a sergeant first class then. And I was in the communication chief for the whole battalion. And we fired for the infantry. And my wire team, we had 17 men that laid wire. And in 1 week, we would lay 275 miles of wire. And we do it walking. We walked because we stayed off of the road so somebody Jeep wouldn't run it and somebody wouldn't steal our wire. But I stayed there. I was there as a wire team chief for 9 months. And the battalion commander come by and told me he wanted me to be his first sergeant. And in the artillery at that time, the communication chief become the first sergeant if something needed the first sergeant. But ours got killed, and he had to replace him. And he said, I want you to be my first sergeant. And I told him, I said, well, you're supposed to get the communication chief. He said, not in my battalion. He says, you gonna be my first sergeant. I said, okay, whatever. So I went to become the first sergeant. And I was still E7 at that time. I'd made E8. I was an E8. E7 really was a master sergeant. And at that time, that was all you had, was master sergeant. It was E7, as high as you could go. So I was an E6, and I told the battalion commander come and told me, he said, I'll make you master sergeant if you'll solid to stay 9 more months, or 6 more months over here. And I told him, I said, well, Colonel, I know that you stand good to your order, but I said, I wouldn't stay over here for your colonel, your position. So he said, okay. So on the 20th of December, I made master sergeant. And on the 21st of December, I started to come home. So I came home, and it took me 30 days to get home. I got home on the 20th of January. And we went from here, went to Fort Gordon, Georgia, stayed in Gordon for 18 months. And from Gordon, I went to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And all this time, I was still a first sergeant. I'd served in the MP battalion at Fort Gordon, Georgia. And at Fort Belvoir was an engineer school. And I had one of the engineer companies there as the first sergeant. And I had 700 men in the company there at Fort Gordon, at Fort Belvoir. They were boys going to the engineer school. And I stayed there 18 months. And then I got orders to go to New Hampshire. Well, I went to Germany. I went and stayed in Germany 3 years. Jenny went over and stayed with me 2 years. And then after my tour in Germany, I came back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And I was in the artillery over in Fort Gordon, Germany, an artillery battalion. And we came back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I was still the first sergeant of the company. And the Army came out with the E8 rank. And during that time, we had master sergeants that worked in clubs and just had pie jobs all over everywhere because they were as high as they could get in rank. But when they came out with the E8, they come out of the woodwork. They had to in there, and I was sitting there with had a rank of 2 years, 3 years as a master sergeant. And they come out of there, and some of them had 20 years in rank. So they started pulling their position for us, and they kicked us juniors out. And at that time, when I was in Germany, I had a battalion commander that was the meanest commander I've ever seen, Colonel Brown, but the most honest, straight shooting man that I've ever worked for. If he told you something, he expected you to do it. That was just all there was to it. And he expected you to be a soldier. And he was my battalion commander over in Germany. And he went to the University of New Hampshire as a professor of military science. And when I got to Fort Sill, of course, the man come out of the woodwork and took my job as first sergeant. And I called Colonel Brown. I asked him, I said, is there any way you might find me a hole? He said, I got one right now. Go down there and put your request for transfer in. And I went down and put my request for transfer in and had some hassle to get it approved. And finally the post sergeant major said, I don't know who you know, but he said, I got a fax from the 1st Army headquarters to send you as soon as possible. So I said, well, I'm on my way. So I went to the University of New Hampshire and stayed there 6.5 years. And other than war, I guess that was the most rewarding job that I had. It was a great thing to see young men come in right out of high school, in college. And at that time, the university was a land grant college. And they had to have your juniors and your freshmen and seniors had to be in the ROTC. And we had the Air Force and the Army there. And as the Army said, the Air Force was a gut course. All you had to do was show up. And the Army was a rough course. And the rules was that any one of the services could not have but 60% of the freshman class. And the Air Force would fill that 60% up like that. And then everything else had to go to the Army. And it was rewarding to see them young men come in there and go out in 4 years a lieutenant. The first 2 years, they seemed they would be lost, and then they'd find themselves, and they were excellent soldiers. And from there, I went back to career as a KMAG advisor to the Korean Army in the Engineer Division. I jumped around in all the services. They had me about all of them. And I stayed there 18 months. And we advised the First Rock Army's engineer. We really built bridges and roads and just looked at them. And your experience in career, one that stuck in my mind, we had rock crushers that could just take front end loaders and just fill them up and crush rock off. But we didn't use that front end loader. We used women. And we had in one of our crew sites, we had 100 people working on that site. There was 99 women and 1 man. And they would go pick up rocks and carry them up a blanket, throw them in that rock crusher. All day long. For 11 hours. They would pick up rocks, throw in that, and just like ants is what it looked like. And we paid them 10 cents a day. 10 cents a day. And I questioned it several times, and they said, well, what we could do, we knew. Could do it with a front end loader and 1 soldier. But says we're giving 100 people a job. And I had a counterpart in the Korean Army. And my counterpart I made more in one day than he did in 17 months. That's how bad their pay scale was. And while I was there, the Vietnam War started. And they had a career, they wanted an engineer battalion to go to Vietnam. They wanted 800 enlisted men and 20 officers. So they went for the volunteers. They had 16,000 soldiers volunteered to be one of the 800. And the officers, we needed 20, and there was 500 officers volunteered to go. And one of the reasons was when they went to Vietnam, as soon as they got in Vietnam, they drew their pay from the Korean Army. And the Americans paid them $125 a month. And they were millionaires at the first payroll. And they would stay there a year and a half, save all their money. And when they went back to Korea, well, they were millionaires. They had so much money that they could just go in. Right. And Korea, you can see they're go get it. What they, and then when I came back from there, I went to Fort Bragg, and I was the post operations sergeant at Fort Bragg. I stayed there 3 years, and then I went to Vietnam. And I was an infantryman. And in Vietnam, I was a battalion operations sergeant. I'd got rid of that first sergeant's job, and I was a post operations sergeant at Fort Bragg. And when I got there, I was a battalion operations sergeant for an infantry battalion. And we were up at Phu Bai and Hue, which was terrible. And from then we moved down out from Saigon. We were 35 miles north of Saigon. And our mission was to guard Saigon, let none of the VC get into Saigon. And we stayed there. And I guess in Vietnam, you get a lot of memories. And of course, I was a battalion operations sergeant, and I looked after everything that happened in the battalion. And the night that Armstrong walked on the moon, I had a TV crew from ABC, and they wanted to go and be at the company. So when an ambush man come out of the ambush, they'd go out and stay all night, and then they'd come back in the morning. And they wanted to interview one of those men that was on that ambush when they come back in. So they carried, it looked like a helicopter full of equipment. And they set up in the company. And I told them, I said, now, when that sun goes down, nobody comes out of that position. You are stuck there. If you are attacked, you're there. Nothing comes out of that position until sunup. They all wanted to do it. So during the night, I had an ambush that got hit. Had 2 men that got wounded. So I called for medevac to go get them. And as soon as the medevac got in and got off the ground, he told me, he said, I got some strange passengers on board. I said, what do you mean? He said, I got 3 men on here that ain't wounded. But said, I believe I would have had to knock them in the head to keep them off this helicopter. So when they got in, it was that ABC crew. They had them a wheel out of there, and they got out of there. And it was 10 days before they went back and got their equipment. But after Vietnam, I came back to Fort Bragg. Same job, same desk that I had when I left. And I stayed there 2 years. And they come back and told me, says, you're going back to Vietnam. And I said, no, I'm not going back to Vietnam. I'll retire before I go. And I wanted to stay 30 days. And Jenny liked to whip me when I told her we were retiring. But they told me, said, well, you're going to have to retire or you're going back to Vietnam. I said, well, you'll get my retirement papers in the morning. So I got out with 23 years. I did not go back to Vietnam. I come on home. And come home on a Friday, went to work Monday morning at the Chamber of Commerce over in Benson. And I worked there every year. and then I became the city manager. And I stayed there 10 years. And went from there to Four Oaks. I was a town clerk here in Four Oaks for 6 years. And from there I went to Kenley. And I stayed there 12 years as city manager. And then I retired and come home. I hope I'm not rambling too much.
That's fine. It's basically everything.
Anything. What was your favorite or most memorable experience or memory? Could be serious, funny.
The one is a strange one that
Okay.
sticks in my mind more than anything else. I went to Korea, and it was February, and I came from Japan to Busan on a ferry. And when I got to Busan, they put me on a train, sending me north. And the Army, the Red Cross was everywhere you went. And I admire them for that. But at that station, they gave me a cup of coffee and a donut. And I got on the train and we were getting ready to go. And everywhere in Korea there was children begging. Everywhere you went there was children begging. And this little girl, I seen her running alongside there. She was barefooted, and it was below zero. She had an ice potato sack, and had 2 holes cut out for her arms and 1 for her neck, and that's what she was wearing. And I would say she was probably 10, 12 years old. And she was running alongside the train begging. And I looked out the window, and I had a donut. And I threw that donut to her just as close as I could get it. And it went over her head. And a little Korean boy snatched it up as soon as it hit the ground. And instead of him running with it, he broke it half in two and come back and give that little girl half of it. And to me, that stuck in my mind more than anything else in all my war experiences. Here, a little girl was freezing to death, I know. And that little boy, he had that thing in his hand, and he was as hungry as she was. But he broke it half in two and gave it back to her. And in my war stories, that's the one that sticks in my heart most. And then, even during the Korean War, they had a program of "Why are you here? Why are you here?" That was the Army program. Why are you here? Mm-hmm. And I always said the why. The reason I was here because of that little boy. Why? That's why I was in Korea. For a little boy that would do something like that. Set in my mind. I knew why I was there. Terrible time over there. Mm-hmm. Cold. Not like this morning.
And what do you think of Korea now?
It amazes me how well they have come.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always said, when I was in Vietnam, that I'd give anything in the world if I could take a farmer from Korea and give him an acre in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. He would work himself to death. He would raise 3 crops because they were working people. Mm-hmm. And in Vietnam, they'd have 1 crop, they'd sleep half the day and just filter around. But the Koreans, and that's why they're like they are now. Mm-hmm. Those people worked. And they had a tough living. An example, you had a pear tree. You had a farmer there, I watched him, he had a pear tree. And when them pears got about that big, he went there and put a paper sack around every pear that was hanging on that tree. And then he or some member of his family sat under that pear tree 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until them pears were ripe. Keep people from stealing.
Huh.
They were guarding their income. And that always amazed me. That, and in career, I hate to say it was not a sin to steal, it was a sin to get caught.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's getting about that way here.
Yeah, that's true.
But career, I can understand why they're like they are, but Lord, the position that they're in,
Oh, yeah.
and they said in the news today that he had agreed to talk to the South Koreans, but they're 36 miles from wiping off the map.
Yeah.
And there is millions of them there. It's just, but the only bad thing I read about it is that the young people are against the Americans. They
are.
And we can't do nothing right. We never done nothing right.
They are.
They wouldn't be in this world if it weren't for us.
Yeah.
That's true. Anything else, Nathan?
Okay, I'm good.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop it right here.